say the color is this color from the design. Okay, that does it for the color. Let's get the fonts right. And actually, I think all of the fonts on this page are inter, so I'm just going to change that in the body. We'll say inter, and then I think a backup of sans serif makes sense. Let me just comment this out. Yeah, okay, so that's making a difference. So awesome. Our Google fonts are coming through just fine. I can also see from the design that the React Facts logo words there have a font weight of 700, so we'll bold those up a little bit. Or maybe that's the default. Doesn't look like it's making much of a difference. And then let's do the same thing for our H4. It has this color from the design, and it looks like it has a font weight of 600. Okay, that's making a slight difference, so that's good. And it kind of looks to me like React Facts maybe needs to be a little bit bigger. And yeah, I can see from the design that it has a font size of something around 22 pixels. Okay, that's looking awesome. Now, when I can avoid it, I usually don't love to style things with their native components if I don't have to. Maybe just for practice sake, I'm going to go into my navbar and I'll start providing some class names here. So let's give a class name to everything on the page. Let's go class name equals, and then up here, maybe I'll use something kind of like BEM syntax. I'll say this is part of the nav block, and the element is the icon. And then we'll say this is the nav block, and the element is the, it's kind of like the logo text. And this one is part of the nav, and let's call it the, maybe like the title of our project here. And what's nice about that is I don't have to do these kind of nested selectors anymore. My H3 was nav logo text, and I can also select my nav title and change these other selectors as well. And one thing I've learned about Scrimba is I have to make sure I save this when I change my class names before I come to the CSS. Otherwise, the CSS updates live, but the markup does not. So once I hit refresh there, that kind of put everything back the way it was. Awesome. This is a really excellent start. Frankly, most of what we did here was just CSS instead of actually doing React. But my goal with this course is not just to focus entirely on React. I want to synthesize some of the information you have been learning so far, including revisiting the CSS and markup and stuff like that as much as we can. Frankly, in this first section of the course, we aren't doing much of the detailed side of React. We mostly have just learned some of the very basic syntax. But I think it's important for us to kind of remind ourselves of the past information we've learned by practicing it here. So the next thing we're going to do is fill out the body section here, or the main section here. There's a couple of gotchas with this that we're going to actually address later. But whenever you feel good about everything we've done here in this challenge, then let's move on to the Okay, let's work on this main section here. I do want you to skip 2 aspects of the design right now. We're not going to worry about changing the colors of these bullets, and we're not going to worry yet about adding this logo over here to the right. Everything else, though, is fair game for this exercise, so pause the screencast and work on this task. All right, let's go ahead and make this into a main element. This is another semantic HTML element, and it represents the main section of our app here, so we will call it that. And it looks like it really only has 2 elements in it. It's got this H1 and an unordered list with 5 list items. So that should be relatively straightforward. And it says fun facts about React. We have our unordered list. And I'm going to hit Option Shift down to create copies of those, so I don't have to type them out manually every time. And then I'll actually go ahead and just copy and paste the text from the Figma file, so you don't need to sit and watch me do that. All right, let me move this over just a tiny bit. And let's hit refresh. Okay, that's a good start. Let's get some of the design aspects going here. I've got my main element, and I think I feel okay styling that as the main element because I will probably only have one. Well, I know that I'll only have one. And we will give it a background color, which we can go ahead and grab from the Figma file. Okay, and well, this highlights some issues here. Now, I haven't set up my body or my main element to be a full height, and it looks like maybe the collapsing margin, I'm guessing this H1 has a margin on top, which is causing this whole section to collapse down below. So let's give, first of all, the main section a height of, let's try 100%. Yeah, sometimes that doesn't work. Maybe if I give my body a height of 100 view height, and let me refresh this. Well, okay, you know what? I think this is highlighting another problem that I was planning on addressing later. So for now, what I'm going to do is actually move this background color to the body so that it does cover everything. Okay, and that'll be a good enough start. We'll fix this a little bit later, but it did highlight the fact that what we had here is our main section is not taking up the entire body here. In a couple of screencasts from now, we'll see why that's a problem, but for now, I'm just going to put my background color on the body. Okay, and I probably actually don't need this height of 100% right now. We'll come back to that later. Oh, however, I do want to give it some padding, and it looks like from the design I have about 55 pixels. It says 57. We'll just go ahead with 57 on the top and bottom, and then about 27 pixels on the left and right. And well, you know what? I think that margin, this looks a little too much. I'm going to guess that the margin of my H1 here is a little bit high. Let me just check that. If I set this to margin 0, yeah, that normalizes it a little bit more. So instead of selecting all H1s, let's go here and give this a class name. And similar to the last one, I'll say this is the main block and it's the title element. And that way I can be a little more specific about which H1 I want. And again, I need to refresh this in order for that class name to apply. And awesome. Okay, the sizing is looking good. Let's get our color correct. Now our H1 here also has a font size of about 39 pixels, and everything else needs to be white. Maybe I'll just color the entire section here. Yeah, that'll work. Okay, awesome. Well, now that I have removed the margin from my title, it looks like my unordered list is bumping a little bit close to my title. Rather than giving my title a margin bottom to push it down, I personally prefer to have elements push themselves away from other elements, if that makes any sense. And when I see this, I think of the unordered list as being too close to the H1 as opposed to the other way around. That might not make any sense. That's just how my mind is working. I'm going to give my unordered list a class name. let's say this is main dash dash, we'll say facts. And we will select our main facts, and I'll give it a margin top of, it looks like the design says 46 pixels. Okay, now actually I just looked at the Figma file and noticed that our title actually has a slight change to the letter spacing. So I'm just going to copy and paste that here, and yeah, that compresses our H1 a little bit, actually quite a bit. So we will go ahead and leave that there. Sometimes these rules like this are really easy to overlook if you aren't looking closely in the Figma design. Something that's really nice is I can actually just copy all of the rules if I need to and paste them here, and then I can decide which ones are actually making a difference or are necessary. Now I already have that one. I can just comment these out. This one's technically making a slight difference. I'm not terribly worried about it. The font size we already specified. Font weight of bold is already the default. Font style of normal, and so forth. I can get rid of some of these as well. But we can see this one actually did make quite a bit of a difference, so it's good that we put it in there. Okay, now these are really close together, so I'm going to select all of the list items under main facts. I'm doing this just so I don't have to give a class name to every single LI or give the same class name to every single list item there. And actually, let's go ahead and do the same thing I did before. I'm just going to copy some of these font styles that we have inside of Figma and see if any of them made a difference. I don't need that. That's not making a difference. That's already the default. That's already the default. That makes a tiny difference. Maybe I'll leave it in there. It did separate them a little bit. I'm guessing, however, I'm going to have to apply some padding to these. So let's give a little bit of padding. There's a relatively new CSS property called padding block that allows me to only specify the padding on the top and bottom in one go. Let's start with 10 pixels and see how that looks. And yeah, that looks fairly accurate. Another thing I'm noticing is that the text is actually wrapping around here, and mine is not. It's going all the way to the right. This probably isn't much of a problem. If I did want to fix that, I could probably just apply a max width on my list items. That way it's not taking up the entire left to right, maybe something like 400 pixels. And yeah, that seems to wrap it a little bit. And awesome, this is a great start. We're only missing two minor things. We're going to change these colors of these bullets to be the same color as our logo up here, and we're also going to add this little React logo over here to the right. However, both of these have a little bit of a gotcha to them, so I thought it could be good to do them each as a separate assignment, and that is... Originally, my plan was to give you a challenge to color the bullets and make them just a little bit larger like we have in the design. However, as I was researching this, I came across a relatively new CSS property, or rather pseudo selector, that makes this challenge extremely easy. So just this once, you can sit back and relax. I'm going to show you just how easy this is. There's a little bit of a gotcha with it, but I included a slide here that shows you the MDN docs for the marker pseudo element. And believe it or not, this very specifically selects the bullets on list items. And even look at this example. It's changing the color and it's making it a little bit larger with its font size. That's exactly what we want to do. You can click this slide to go check out the docs, poke around these allowable properties, and of course, you should probably play with this a little bit. But fortunately, this is a really easy thing for us to implement. I'm just going to copy this and add my pseudo element selector for marker. One thing to keep in mind is that this is not accepted by all browsers. However, Safari, Firefox, and newer versions of Chrome have all adopted the marker pseudo element selector, and I'm certain as time passes, this is going to become even more widely accepted, and therefore I feel pretty confident using this method for accomplishing this task. So simply enough, I can change the font size to, let's say, something like 1.4 rem, and sure enough, that made our bullets a little bit larger. Now, as I was playing with this, I noticed that if we get too large, let's say 3 rem, things become pretty misaligned, and at least at this time when I was researching, I could not find a good way to realign these bullets with the text. So in my playing around, I found that 1.4 made the bullets larger without getting them misaligned with the text. So for now, we have that limitation. I'm just going to work within that and say the font size is 1.4 rem. It's not quite as large as what we have here, but that's okay. And then again, simply enough, I'm just going to go take the color of our text here. This is the blue color that we want, and stick it right here as our color. And sure enough, we have the blue color on the bullets. Easy peasy. Well, I hope you didn't become too comfortable letting me do all the work, because in the next screencast, we are going to add this logo. And by we, I of course mean you, in a challenge. So that's what we'll do in the next screencast. I actually debated a little bit whether or not I should include this as a real challenge for this section, only because it touches on some CSS that you may not be super familiar with. But in the end, I settled on remembering that you guys are capable and you can use Google to your advantage just like a real developer. So here it is. I decided to add it in. Your challenge is to place that gray React logo in the background. We have that logo here under images as React icon large.png. Something important to know about this icon is that it is actually half of the React logo. It looks from the design like maybe it's a full React logo that's just bleeding off the page, but if you look closely, once you put this React icon large on your actual page, you'll notice that it's only half of a logo. At first, that threw me off. That just had to do with the way that I exported it from Figma. Honestly, I think it makes our job a lot easier as we're placing it on the page. So just keep that in mind as you move forward. One last little piece of advice I'll give you is to add this background image to the main element. It probably would work just fine to add it to the entire body element, but I'm going to be doing it to main, so you might as well do it to the main element as well. Again, Google is a developer's best friend, so don't be afraid to use Google while you're trying to solve this challenge. Pause now and work on adding this background image. Okay, hopefully you found this wasn't actually that big of a deal. So I'm going to add first the background image to my main element here. I'm going to use the URL function so I can specify the location for these images. This is relative to my style.css file, so I'm going to say ./images/react icon large.png. Okay, and we see that it automatically is repeating around the entire page. So that's where the background repeat comes in, and we want to say no repeat. Of course, here by default, it puts it in the upper left of our page, or rather the main element. And this is where background position comes in. Now, background position is actually a combination of background position X and background position Y. In fact, let's start out there. We can say background position X, that's my position to the left and right. I want to push it all the way to the right. This is where having half of a logo becomes pretty handy for us because it automatically looks like it's bleeding off the side of the page. And then with background position Y, we can specify something like top, which is where it is now, or bottom. Bottom, I think, is a touch too low. although center is maybe a touch too high. I can also use percentages, so we can split the difference and say something like 75%. And now that we've seen these as two separate properties, I actually can just combine these and say background position, which is background position X, and then I'll use a space and then Y of 75%, and that simplifies it a bit. If I really wanted to, I could use the shorthand background property, which would be background, and then I would just copy and paste this one first, space, this one, space, this one. Honestly, I always forget what the background property is short for, so I'm actually going to leave these as three separate properties so that in the future, it's really easy for me to remember what each of those pieces means. And awesome, this represents a culmination of everything that we've learned so far about React. Let me go ahead and clean up this challenge. Now, of course, we've been spending a bit of time in CSS land here, and as I've mentioned, I still think that's a really important thing to do. Even though our main focus in this course is to learn React, it's really important to synthesize some of that other information that you have learned in the past so that it doesn't become stale to you and you just forget it. That being said, in the next screencast, let's spend some time looking back at everything that we did learn about React, because that's actually what we're here to learn. And at the same time, we'll take that opportunity to have a quick quiz and to look at a self-assessment project that you can do on your own. So that's what we'll be doing next. With a subtle nod to Vanilla Ice, it's time to go solo. As I've mentioned, one of the best parts of Scrimba is that you get to do the challenges alongside me as your instructor, and while that is an excellent way to get your hands on the keyboard to practice as much as possible, it is a bit like you learning to ride a bike with training wheels. And of course, if you've ever learned to ride a bike, an important thing in your learning journey is to take off those training wheels and try to do it by yourself. If you've been going through the career path on Scrimba, then you are certainly no stranger to the concept of solo projects. If that's the case, you're welcome to skip on to the next scrim, which is an introduction to the solo project. If you haven't done a solo project, then the concept is that, like I said, we take those, so to speak, training wheels away, and you no longer have me there to give you the answers after I give you a challenge. Hopefully you have done a great job of always doing the challenge before I gave you any kind of solution, but even if you have, it's really important to try to do something by yourself. So the solo project is a chance for you to be on your own with a project spec that you get to try and build all by yourself. I know the concept of this can be daunting, but the truth is, this is where the best learning happens. So let's talk about why we do these solo projects. Well, the first reason is that it will stress test your skills. Stress testing your skills is not only the best way to find where you are still lacking and what topics you still need to improve on, it's also one of the most powerful ways to continue learning. Now, you might also remember I talked about how solo projects do not have to be completely by yourself. It really just means that the instructor isn't going to be there to feed you answers. The truth is, we highly recommend everybody that's doing a solo project to get a student code review in our Scrimba Discord community. If you've already joined our Scrimba Discord server, you may have seen the code reviews channel. This is a place where all of our students can post their solutions to the solo projects and ask if anybody in the community would be willing to give them a code review. For example, here, Corey just had finished the hometown homepage project and posted a link to the work that he had been doing on Scrimba. Luckily enough, Fama was able to jump on it and give a recorded audiovisual code review. It gave Corey tips on how to make their CSS more dry, as well as other best practices that Corey could follow. So it's no wonder that Corey was super thankful for this and mentioned that it helped them immensely. Now, please remember that giving code reviews is a voluntary service by the community. So even if you do post something here, you aren't necessarily guaranteed to get a code review, although our community members are very helpful and you are more likely than not to get a code review from someone. If you find that you really enjoy receiving code feedback, you may want to consider looking at our bootcamp. In the bootcamp, we have guaranteed code reviews by vetted and paid code reviewers. So that could always be something you consider as well. Now let's talk about another reason why these solo projects can be helpful. As you are continuing to learn, you should also be building a portfolio of the projects that you're working on. This is one of the primary ways that people looking to hire junior developers can figure out what your skill level is. And these solo projects are much more impressive to have in your portfolio than the projects that we do together in the course. Those are great for the learning process, but the solo project, as a project that you have to code up by yourself, is a much more impressive project for your portfolio. And throughout the entire career path, we do so many solo projects that your portfolio will really be shining by the end. We build things like blogs, utilities, games, mobile apps, and even full-blown portfolios. Now, before we move on to the solo project, there's two things to note. First of all, as I have mentioned before, these solo projects are for Scrimba Pro members only. So if you would like to do the solo projects, you'll need to upgrade your account to Scrimba Pro if you haven't already done so. One reason for this is to keep a certain level of exclusivity for these projects so that there aren't hundreds of thousands of people out there with the exact same projects in their portfolios. Of course, if you're not in a position at this time to upgrade your account to a pro account, that's completely okay. The rest of the core lessons in this course are still provided for free, so you could always skip over the solo project and you would still get a ton of value from the rest of this course. If you do plan on doing the solo projects and you haven't been doing them already in the career path, one thing you'll need to do is to head over to figma.com and create an account. Figma is where we have all of the designs for our solo projects, and Figma is a must-have skill for any front-end web developers in a professional environment. So you can click the screenshot here to go straight to Figma if you do want to create an account, and if you haven't used Figma before, that's okay, because I have created a quick tutorial on how to use Figma for web developers. This doesn't really dive into the designing on Figma aspect of it, but rather how to make the best use of the designs that you see on Figma. Like before, you can click the screenshot here to head over to YouTube to watch that if you'd like. Okay, with all that said, best of luck, and let's continue forward.
Hey Scrimba students, congrats on completing a React solo project. I hope you learned a lot, and I hope you're ready to show it off because I'm here to show you how to use Netlify to deploy your React apps to the web. Deploying to Netlify is arguably the easiest. Hey Scrimba students, congrats on completing a React solo project. I hope you learned a lot and I hope you're ready to show it off because I'm here to show you how to use Netlify to deploy your React apps to the web. Deploying to Netlify is arguably the easiest. Hey Scrimba students, congrats on completing a React solo project. I hope you learned a lot and I hope you're ready to show it off because I'm here to show you how to use Netlify to deploy your React apps to the web. Deploying to Netlify is arguably the easiest part. It's a matter of dragging and dropping our project folder into Netlify. But first we have to prepare our files. We have to get them production ready. So before we get started, I have a little warning. The process of preparing our files involves using the command line and other tools you may or may not be comfortable or familiar with yet, but it'll be okay. We'll be typing only 2 commands, and you don't even need to worry about what it all means. Just type the commands I give you, and everything should be fine. To follow along with me, you're going to need VS Code because we're going to use its built-in terminal. If you don't have VS Code installed yet, you can click on the text or the image to go to the download page. And from there, you can click the button to download the latest stable build for your system and go through the installation process. You'll also need to download your project files from the Scrim. And you can do that by going to your project Scrim, clicking on the gear, and then clicking download as zip. For this Scrim, I'll be using a very simple, kind of ugly example so as not to give away any solo project solutions. So once you've downloaded the files, you're going to want to unzip them and open them in VS Code. And you can do that by clicking this open button and navigating to your folder. When you open the folder, you may get this "Do you trust the author of the files" warning, and you can go ahead and click yes. Now that we've got our folder open, we can open VS Code's built-in terminal. You can do that by clicking view in the top taskbar and then clicking terminal. Or if you're on a Mac, the keyboard shortcut is Control tilde, which on a US keyboard anyway is the button right above the tab key. Open the terminal, and the next thing you'll want to do is check to see if you have Node and npm installed. We need both of these in order to bundle our files for deployment. So in the terminal, you can type node-v, and if a version comes up, then you have Node installed. Your version is likely to be different than mine, especially since I haven't updated Node in a while. And to check if npm is installed, you can enter npm-v. If you don't have Node or npm installed, one way to install it is directly from nodejs.org. You can click on the image to get there, and then you can choose the latest version for your operating system and go through the install process. However, the recommended way to install is using Node Version Manager or NVM. And that's because it makes it easier to manage the versions of Node you have running on your machine, and it's easier to keep your version of Node up to date and things like that. So here I've included some resources to help you get set up with Node.js using NVM. I've included a couple of YouTube videos as well as some pretty thorough written tutorials. So if you need to, pause the Scrim here and come back once you have Node installed. Once you have Once Once you have Node and npm installed, in the terminal, you're going to type npm install. The terminal will then spit out a bunch of stuff that you don't need to worry about. But over here, VS Code may switch to the debug panels. You can go ahead and click these two pieces of paper to go back to your files. The next command I'd like you to type is npm run build. This is going to tell Webpack to bundle our files and get them ready for production. So this is going to spit out a bunch of stuff, which you can also ignore. But I'd like to draw your attention to this left sidebar where two things have happened. We now have this Node modules folder and this file called index.pack.js. Index.pack.js is our bundled file, and that's what Netlify will use when we deploy our project. After you've run the npm run build command, you can go ahead and delete the Node modules folder. It's a really big file, and we don't need it to deploy. Netlify should ignore it, but I did have some issues when I was trying to deploy, so be sure to delete it from the folder before moving on to the next step. Now you can sign in or sign up for Netlify. Go ahead and click on the text or the image, go to Netlify's sign up page. If you're just signing up, you'll go to this Get Started page that you can fill out however you'd like, scroll down and click Setup and Continue. You'll then have the option to deploy your first project. And here where it says Deploy Manually is where you can drag and drop your folder. Alternatively, you can click the text or the image to go to Netlify's drop site. You can navigate or drag your folder, but it's important that you're uploading the entire folder that you downloaded and unzipped from the Scrim. Netlify will then begin uploading your files, and you'll be redirected to this site dashboard where it should take just a few minutes to deploy. Once it's done deploying, Netlify will generate a random URL for your application, which you can click on to view your deployed app. Yay! A final thing I'd like to show you is if you return to your site dashboard and click deploy, scroll down, and should you want to make any changes to your project, you can re-upload it here. And that is how you can use Netlify to deploy a React project. Now that your hard work is public, don't forget to share it. To easily share your project to Twitter, you can click on this Share Solution button here in the header. It writes the tweet for you and everything. You'll just need to copy and paste your project's URL into the text before you tweet it out. Happy deploying, Scrimba student, and I will see you next time.
Okay, so now that you've completed your solo project and you hopefully have a piece of code that you are a little bit proud of, you probably also have a lot of questions. For example, did I do this right? Are there any big mistakes? Or have I adopted any bad coding patterns? So, wouldn't it be nice if you could get someone else to take a look at your code and give you feedback? For example, someone who is a little bit ahead of you in the journey, who will be able to spot the mistakes you might have done and ways you can improve your code in general. Well, getting those kinds of code reviews is possible here at Scrimba. And it's actually possible in two different ways. The first one are student reviews, and the second one are teacher reviews. Let's now break down the differences between student and teacher reviews. Starting with the student reviews, you are eligible to get these if you are a pro member here on Scrimba. These are done by other students who are a little bit ahead of you in the path, as they have gone through a module about reviewing code. So this is what we call peer-to-peer code reviews. There's no guarantee that you will get these, because getting a student code review is dependent upon the other student actually spending their precious time looking at your code and helping you out. So we can't guarantee that you will get a student review, but you are more than free to share your project in the Code Reviews Discord channel and ask for a review, and if you're lucky, someone will pick it up and give you feedback. The feedback will come in the form of text, or if you're lucky, a scrim that the student has recorded just for you. And from experience, these scrim reviews are much better than textual reviews, though both are super helpful for you on the receiving end. Okay, moving on to the teacher reviews then. These reviews are available for bootcamp students. And the reason they're only available for bootcamp students is because we're paying teacher assistants that we have vetted and trained to record reviews of your code. So here is also a financial aspect to it. This means that you are guaranteed to get a code review, and you're actually guaranteed to get it as a scrim, which is the best format to get feedback on your code. And not only that, you'll get it within 24 hours after you submit your solution. So, in order to learn more about student reviews, you can click this link right here and you'll get to the Discord channel where the student reviews are facilitated. And if you're curious about the teacher reviews, click on this link right here and you'll get to the bootcamp landing page where you'll learn more about that program in general. It costs more than being just a pro member, but it is the ultimate learning experience here on Scrimba that'll maximize your chance of getting a job as a developer.
Awesome job building some of your first React projects. I know that these are just static sites, and so far you're really not seeing the benefits of using React to build these kinds of projects. But now that we have some of the basic React syntax under our belts, we're ready to start dipping our toes into a few of the really neat features that React has to offer as a framework. But first, let's take just a minute to recap what we've worked on so far in this section. In the beginning, it can be really helpful to know why we even care about React in the first place. We learned about how it is composable and declarative, what those terms mean, and how that's beneficial to us as web developers. Then we learned about the JSX syntax and how that allows us to write code that's much more familiar to us because it looks like we're writing HTML code inside of our JavaScript. Then we saw how we could actually apply the composable nature of React by creating our own custom components. For example, in our React Facts site, we created our own components for the main content of our page, but also for our navigation bar. Obviously, in this case, our navigation bar and our main sections are pretty simple, but hopefully you can imagine as your sites get more and more complex, how the ability to segment each of the pieces of your page into its own components can be a really beneficial thing. And soon we'll be really tapping into the power that comes with that as we learn more about React. Then we started learning about how we can style our projects because, well, obviously adding CSS is one of the key things that we need to make it look polished. Truthfully, there are a ton of ways to add styling to React. For now, we'll just be sticking with CSS classes because they're familiar, and all of these things combined have enabled us to create our own static pages in React. Like I mentioned, because we've only been working on static things so far, you might not yet be understanding why we're using React in the first place, but I promise we're going to get there, and I promise it will be worth it. Before just moving on, you should celebrate your wins. Over in Discord, there is a Today I Did channel. If you click on the screenshot here, it will take you there, and you should let everyone know that you have just completed the first section of the Introduction to React. Also, this might be a good time to realize if you've been sitting down for too long or watching too much of this in one sitting, make sure you take a break. Your brain needs to rejuvenate itself, especially with all the new information you've been learning. So once again, congratulations on completing this section. You really should be proud of yourself. When you're ready to jump deeper into React, I will see you in the next section. Now that we've covered the basic syntax and concepts of building a static